Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I have an extraordinary guest that I'm going to be talking to today, someone who went from a Chinese labor camp to living the American dream, an American success story. It's the CEO of the Epoch Times and NTD TV. I have Janice Trey joining me. Janice, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. How are you today?
Doing wonderful. Thank you, Professor Giordano. Glad to be on your show.
Well, I mean, you have a remarkable story to tell, okay? So you lived through Mao's Cultural Revolution over in China. In fact, you spent nearly a decade in a labor camp. How old were you when you were on that labor camp?
My first 9 years of life were in the labor camp. My parents were college graduate engineers, and that's why they were sent to labor camps into very remote part of China. To give you an idea, for me to go to the closest school, it took 1.5 hours by foot each way. I have to walk past a crop field, walk past the cemetery, climb a hill, get to the other side as a first grader, second grader, and third grader. And I was a child labor, grew the sugar cane on the top of the hill. I carried fertilizers heavier than myself. And during harvest season, every day I must walk on the crop field, aisle by aisle, to pick up any crops dropped because they use hand tools. If I could not fill up a full plastic bag of crops picked up from the field, I could not return to school the next day.
Well, I mean, that really is extraordinary. And you said that your parents were engineers. People need to know that when Mao's Great Leap Forward failed and it caused mass starvation, he created his little black book that really targeted the professional class, right? People that were successful, and he blamed them, even though it was Mao's policies. He needed a scapegoat. So when you were on that labor camp, what was some of the biggest, most impactful lessons that you learned on that labor camp that you still carry with you to this day?
I received paper slips from balloons flew from Taiwan. And they talk about in Taiwan, they don't ride the bicycles, they have private cars, they have television, and they have refrigerators. And in the labor camp, there were no even private bathrooms in your living area. You walk almost a mile. It was crazy. It was really far away. And it was just all controlled. And they have the central bathroom where so they can use, they can collect it and then use it as a fertilizer. And television, what I associated during the labor camp was the only 2 times that we watched was Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai's funerals. We all have to stood in front of the television set, wore something black. So I have no idea that television, you can watch cartoons, there's lots of great programming until I visited my grandfather in Hong Kong. And the only car they had was a military car. That was kind of like a huge truck. So only 2 sitting, the rest you stood. And so the information blockage was unbelievable. When I visited my grandfather in Hong Kong, I compared the textbooks of mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan for the same historic periods. I found totally different descriptions. And that laid the seeds for me to seek the truth. Which versions? The truth. There could be only one and only one truth. And my father, knowing Einstein believed in God, and he had no chance to learn Christianity during the Communist rule, he sent me to Christian school later on. Just for information, my mom, before communism, my grandfather was a successful banker sent her to Catholic school. So she had the experience, but of course with communism. Let me give you like how communism control. First, they mobilized the farmers, promised to redistribute the land. They never did. But then they confiscate the land and then they use food rationing. And that's why lots of people die of hunger. And then they have the Cultural Revolutions from 1966 to 76, 10-year Cultural Revolution. Nick, you would be no escapes. Any educated people, and I'm sure lots of the audience are educated, no escape. Either persecuted death or sent to labor camps, do labor work that unrelated to your profession. And then 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre. Students have no weapons. They roll out the tank. They kill. My best friend was in medical school, Dr. Pan. He personally carried dozens of dead bodies and injured students. The casualties were way farther. And then in 1999, they started the persecution on Falun Gong just because they believe in truth, compassion, tolerance. They do the meditative Tai Chi type of exercise. They are known for the most healthy group of people. And the Communist parties kill them on demand for their organs because there are worldwide shortage for organs. So you could kill on demand fresh organs, command a much higher price tag and have a higher success rate. And so every decade, innocent group of people are being chosen. That's how Communist rule sustained in the past 7+ decades because people live under terror. They self-censor. And that's why stepping onto America, the land of freedom, I treasure every minute, every second of it.
It's amazing when you hear about it because a lot of people don't know that one of the first things that a communist society does is they try and eliminate religion because there can be no higher authority than the Communist Party itself. And if you have religion, well, then there is a higher authority. But you just said something critical. You're thankful every day that you're in the United States, that you came to America. Yet we see so many Americans take advantage, take their freedoms for granted because they've never lived under true oppression. Given your firsthand experience with the horrors of what a communist system actually looks like, what warning signs do you see in America that remind you of communist China?
Well, in fact, it sounds like a cultural revolution reliving on American soil. You can see the cancel cultures. You can see the Confucius Institute. In fact, Epoch Times was one of the first that reported the Confucius Institute. So in the name of teaching Chinese, a lot of Americans like to learn Chinese. So Confucius Institute, in the name of teaching Chinese, and they implanted into high school, into colleges, universities. But they only recruited people directly from China as teachers. Say, me as a bilingual, I can speak fluent Chinese, I can write fluent Chinese, I can teach, but they won't hire me because they only want the Chinese propaganda, communist propaganda. In fact, I read the textbooks from the Confucius Institute. It's full of propaganda. Even the songs they taught the students were praising communism. So the systematic infiltration into our judicial system, into our education system. And let me touch about the lawfare. So 2+ years ago, Xi Jinping specifically ordered the exporting the persecution of Falun Gong to American soil. How do they do that? They use lawfare, and then they use legacy media like the New York Times. They use YouTubers, and in a concerted effort to target Falun Gong and target organizations that were founded by Falun Gong, such as the Shenyun Performing Arts, which is the world's premier classical Chinese dance, showcase China before communism. And if you travel to China today, you see a lot of high-rise buildings. Even if you travel to the forbidden cities, you only see the architecture. You have no idea how people live and what were their values then. But Shen Yun, in 2 hours, 15 minutes, showcased 5,000 years civilization, the China before communism, as well as the persecution, in modern days, the suppressions of freedoms. For 5,000 years, the traditional Chinese history believed in divinity. When communism stopped religious freedoms, for 50 years before Olympics, not a single church permit was allowed in Beijing. Only when Olympic was granted for China, they start building up churches. So even Secretary Condoleezza Rice visited China. She went to church, but those were not churchgoers. Those were actors and actresses because they would not let anybody potentially speak to her. So the religious freedoms is really important, and also the press freedoms. In China, is one mouthpiece. Look at the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, 1989. We all remember the students stood in front of the tank, weaponless. But in the People Dailies, the Chinese People's Daily, which is the mouthpiece, and they talk about, no person were killed. Why will you emphasize no people were killed? That there's something odd, right? And then they talk about student attack the military. Like student has no weapons. How do they attack? And so the editor of the Chinese mouthpiece newspaper said that the only thing you can trust is the dates, the header on the newspapers, and you pretty much read it in reverse. And that's why on American soil, Epoch Times was founded 24 years ago, trying to bring information in and out of China. That's how it started. And unfortunately, some of our journalists were jailed for just bringing accurate information, truthful information, some even jailed for 10 years, but it did not stop us. On November 19, 2004, we published the 9 commentaries of the Communist Party, systematic exposing the lies, the propaganda, because many Chinese have the Stockholm syndrome because they're totally submerged in the communist regimes. They did not know what freedom's like. And so the 9 commentaries inspired 442 million Chinese quit the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliated organization, the Younger Tiers. And this is the most peaceful transition from a communistic state to new communistic states in the most peaceful way. And it's like the civil disobedience that Mahatma Gandhi did in India. And what you see are the Falun Gong people and also the average citizens that they withdraw from the party, seeing it as a sinking Titanic. What do you do if you know that Titanic is sinking? You're trying to get out of it. So by quitting the CCP, that's like jumping out before it sinks. So to expect the Communist Party to change by itself, forget about it. We try for decades of all the business and all that, and in fact, it's kind of like infusing blood to the Communist parties. Instead, what we need to do is to speak up, because only when communism is removed from the face of earth, then there will be world peace. Peace without North Korea's under communist rule. Cuba will be free. Everybody, think of more than 1.4 billion people will be free. And that's where world order, rule of law, and transparency could help American companies and American citizens to prosper, because that's where you have the real peaceful and rule of law.
Well, and you're an outspoken critic of the communist regime in China. When we look at it, China has one of the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on the planet. I mean, they have plenty of agents here in the United States that seek out Chinese people who may be sympathetic to motherland China, but they also try and recruit spies, college professors, people that work in the military-industrial complex, and they also target those that do speak out against the communist regime. So are you fearful when you speak out against the communist system? Why do you show so much courage and there's so many other people that remain so silent?
Well, it's very widespread. I have death threats on my phone. In fact, I still save the message. And when I visited members of Congress and staffers, and they asked me to help translate the message that they have from the consulates, and it was similar message like what I did, and from officers that are supportive and speaking up of human rights. And that need to stop. In fact, there have been bomb threats. So last quarter in 2024, NDD TV hosted competition, classical pianos competition, classical vocal contest, and traditional Chinese martial arts. All three venues received bomb threats. Nothing really happened, but it at the cost of security, and it took a longer time to everybody have to have additional screenings, but they tried to stop us from continued operations. Similarly, Shenyang received bomb threats at different theaters when there was no real bomb threats, but they were just trying to create and disturb, ticket buyers to coming to the shows, or those who have not yet buy tickets to dissuade them from attending to see Shenyang before communism. And so, as American citizens, we should not let that continue, because that's exactly the work of the proxies of the Chinese Communist Party. Some are registered agents, some are unregistered agents. Let me give you another example. I'm on a Rotarian. In fact, Rose Chen, she's an unregistered agent in the Rotary clubs and trying to kick me and my husband out of the Rotary clubs. I mean, just to do good work as a Rotarian. And so at the end, she was not successful because some of the key people in the Rotary Club say, if Janice is out, they will be out. And of course, they kick Rose Chen, the agent, out rather than kick us out. But it really shows that if people speak up, those agents will not last. I mean, we know from Congress, for instance, driver, we know Governor of New York's Deputy Chief of Staffs, they were all charged, for being unregistered agents acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist parties. So I treasure the freedoms. I am not afraid, despite my vehicles, the tire has been plugged with nails, windshield have been slashed, and all sorts of things. And but actually, it's even more important. Strengthen my determination to give a voice to the voiceless. I could have died during the Cultural Revolution. My mom's water broke. She rode on the back of the bicycle to the hospital. I was in a breech position. There were no experienced OBGYN left in the hospitals because they were sent to labor camps. Imagine a C-section without experienced OBGYNs. I could have died during the Tiananmen Square massacre. And I could have died, with the persecution of Falun Gong. The fact that I am alive in front of you, Professor Giordano, I feel like you are giving me the opportunity to give a voice to the voiceless. And Epoch Time and NDTV have been doing for more than 2 decades to give a voice to the voiceless. And as the 4 pillars of the government, media can play a very crucial role to give the voice to the voiceless. In particular, for totalitarian regimes, all it takes more people to speak up, and I'm really glad that a lot of people are speaking up. Secretary Marco Rubio has a great track record. In fact, he co-sponsored the Falun Gong Protection Act when he was on the Senate in the last terms. We have, Senator Rick Scott. We have, Senator Roger Marshall, Senator Rob Johnson. To name just a few. There's so many. Scott Perry, a congressman from Pennsylvania. There are lots of support, but we need more. In fact, all the audience, you could go to your congressmen and senators, say you want to support the Falun Gong Protection Act, because that will stop Xi Jinping's trying to insert power on American soil. He's trying to export the persecution of people who believe in truth, compassion, forbearance. Those are universal values. If Xi Jinping succeeded on American soil, we won't have the freedoms that we have. And it takes is just speaking up.
Well, I have to ask. I mean, you mentioned some people that have been outspoken critics of the communist regime over in China, but a lot of the political leaders have actually remained silent. And they're constantly screaming about foreign interference, but it's more about Russia than communist China. Are you disappointed that there isn't more leadership, particularly from our politicians, speaking out on this issue? I mean, obviously, China is infringing on our sovereignty day in, day out. We see what Mao's Cultural Revolution continuing to present day, that it's all about ideological conformity through fear, censorship, public shaming, re education camps. And yet, so many American politicians do remain silent. Is that disappointing to you?
It's been very sad. You know, I have expected more people to speak up because US cannot live alone. We are in an interconnected world. Just like Epoch Times exposed the tainted milk products before the Olympics, how many babies could have saved if that information carried out? If other legacy medias were also speaking up, and if more politicians, I certainly understand the Chinese Communist Party has hired lobbyist firms and have access to people of influence, just trying to push things. And I personally have met members of Congress before the China trip and after the China trips. And I know they also have like honey traps, in the trips.
Hunter Biden.
And so, but I do believe it's the final war of good versus evil. And I do believe there's final judgments. And I do believe in the creators. It's up to every one of us to see whether we remain silent. If more people speak up back in the Holocaust times, I don't think 6 million Jews will perish. When we say never again, well, right now, when you know of people being killed on demand for their organs, for transplants, if we don't speak up, what else will we do? When they, infiltrated into our education systems, we need to speak up because children are naive and they are two subjects. I mean, even with like TikToks and other things that they were systematically influencing them and all the addictive algorithm that's harmful to the children, we need to speak up. We know evolution is not choose, but few speak up. So injustice anywhere is a threat of justice everywhere. That's a quote that I hope that more people break the silence and don't think a single voice does not matter. It matters because we have over 300 million Americans. And if we all speak up, we have the power to change, to accelerate the fall of communism. For 5,000 years, there were no communisms, and that's a much more peaceful situation. But today, our supply chain is too heavily dependent on communist China. That is very high risk. It's not trying to bow to the pressure, but rather to fix it. And I think we have the information that NDTV have been broadcast through satellites into China. And in fact, Chinese government officials using our anti-censorship tools, we're able to break through the China firewall and, the free gates, for example, and one of those tools. And so it's so important for information flow. Like, why do China censor its internet? Because they want the propaganda. They want people to live under their narrative. And we have the free information, and we just need to ensure that they get the information. So anybody want to help these efforts to end communism, you can become a subscriber to the Epoch Times or the NDD TV. And you could also donate to us. We're a nonprofit 501c3, and we all work towards bringing truth, tradition, and hope to people. And why is tradition so important? Communist rule trying to eradicate classical cultures. During cultural revolutions, they don't even let us listen to Beethoven or Mozart. They don't want any classical culture because that will remind them the time period before communism. So the tradition and classical culture, the revival and the renaissance of it will be a path for us, for others to get connected with divinities. And I think by joining hands together, we can conquer communism. It's just like paper tiger. It's like paper thin. Don't be fooled by the propagandas that the Communist Party trying to paint the very rosy pictures, inaccurate pictures. Let me share with you, as a professor, I know you look at statistics and numbers. You know how GDP numbers were created in China? They asked the different governors to report the numbers. If they report the low numbers, they lose the governorship. They were never elected. So what would they do? They inflate us. So the central governments also know that those numbers are inflated, so they adjusted downwards. But we need real numbers. I mean, we're making business decisions. And that's why the media is also playing the role of truth, accurate reporting. It's all about helping people to make informed decisions. And Epoch Times believe in traditional journalism based on truthful, accurate, and courageous reporting.
Well, and I also have to ask, because something interesting is going on in China. So following Mao, it was about the Communist Party. There was no central leader that could put themselves above the Communist Party. When Xi Jinping began to consolidate his power, now it's more about him than the Communist Party. Is he playing a very dangerous game within the communist system, trying to make it more about him than the party itself? And could this be the thing that ultimately brings communism down in China?
Well, many people have forecasted that he will be the last emperor under the communist rule. There will be a last communist leaders. If you look at the communist leader, Jiang Zemin came to power because he was too successful in cracking down the student movement in Shanghai. From overnight, from a mayor of Shanghai becomes the head of Communist Party. The headliner came in. It was the same period in 1989. The Berlin Wall came down. The Red Curtain came down in Russia and Eastern Europe, changed from communistic to new communistic. China could have taken that path, but back then Deng Xiaoping did not take that path. So that put people in huge sufferings. We could have the liberties and freedoms back then. They missed the opportunity. And that's why Jiang Zemin, he's the one who started the persecution on Falun Gong, because he rose to power. In fact, when he visited NASA, Dr. Ding Caiyin, a top engineer, refused to shake hands with him, saying that not want to shake hands with the bloody hands. And he's known as
That's courage.
Yeah. And so back to Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping had the chance to stop the persecution of Falun Gong that started during Jiang Zemin time. He did not. And he's most afraid of people realize the persecution. People believe in truth, compassion, tolerance. Those are universal values that need to be stopped. People being killed on demand for their organs just because they are the healthy ones. Just some information. There have been 4 major health surveys, each with sample size over 10,000. And the health improvement rates was 96 to 98%. And so people become healthier, even terminal illnesses, people with infertility, all sorts of issues. After they practice Falun Gong, they gain their second life, or they have babies that they could not have because some other structural issues. And so that's why it grew from, to 70 to 100 million. That's a government statistic of 70 to 100 million. And if you look at the February 1999 edition of the U.S. News Report interviewed the head of the sports committee. They said it saved 1,000 yuan Chinese currency per person, save tons and tons of money, because in the Chinese government system, if you work for a government enterprise, the reimbursement is you pay out of pockets and you reimburse to your work units by submitted expenses. And the managers found out that there were no more requests for reimbursements. The people were healthier, even those like, on terminal illnesses, and they were healthy. And that's why it spread so fast. And that's why despite the brutal persecution on Falun Gong, they did not die, because people truly find the values and find the health benefits. And so when you look at it all together, it's really, it's Xi Jinping trying to export the persecution of Falun Gong on American soil. This is the transnational repressions. They trying to silence. So what they did, for example, they have New York Times to publish, 11 articles within 4.5 months and make up stories. And they trying to, if they look at the number of hits, we trace back, it were all China blogs, those not real hits. And so there's something behind, that. So what your audience need to know is, don't read it as face values. There is the invisible hand behind it. The publisher of New York Times met with Jiang Zemin and get access to China. The executive editors, married to a Chinese, Nicole Hong, the author that, wrote about, all those hit pieces. Her father is a CCP operative, Chinese Communist Party operative, worked for the United Front. But most readers have no idea what's going on. So that's why it's so important that people subscribe to, Epoch Times and NED, where we provide truth and accurate information. And we American companies want to bring the American values to the rest of the world. We publish in 35 countries, 22 languages, and we bring truth. And we do it in a courageous way.
And I think the New York Times needs to release how many quote unquote subscribers, paid subscribers they have from coming from China, which is all by the Chinese government, because we're talking millions upon millions of dollars to support the New York Times coming in from foreign countries. But when we look at ultimately at the bigger picture, and I want to end it with this last question, as far as China goes, they are facing a lot of internal struggles today. A few years back, I remember Chinese demonstrations where Chinese people were on the streets screaming, "Give me liberty or give me death." They were quoting Patrick Henry from the United States, a founding father that most Americans don't even know about. I mean, half my students, I brought it up in class, and they were like, "Who's Patrick Henry?" And yet Chinese people were screaming about it. We currently see that Falun Gong is still being targeted by China. We see the Uyghurs. We see that there are still labor camps. There are still concentration camps. Do you think the Chinese people are waking up that they're getting sick of living under the communist system? And as their economy continues to decline, there's going to be a lot of people that don't want to go back into poverty, and they're going to take that frustration out on the Communist Party itself.
Well, they see the Communist Party is the sinking Titanic. Compare Taiwan and Communist China's, they are Chinese. But you look at the GDP, huge difference. You look at North Korea and South Korea, they're Koreans. The huge difference. One is totalitarian regime and one is the free countries. And it's so important that we as Americans, we encourage the Chinese people, because for us, we just like lit the candles, but the small candle can lit up the whole rooms. They need our voice of support. And many Chinese, 442 million already withdrew from the Communist memberships, and more will be willing to do that. And all it takes is the US government and American citizen to speak up, say, we want a China without communism, just like it had been 5,000 years ago. And for those trying to understand what is China look like before communism, go see Shen Yun. SHENYUN, they tour around the world. In fact, I introduced that to Kate Blanchard, and she described it as an extraordinary experience, exquisitely beautiful, and also great for the children. And she said, like, this was very courageous. And we need to make informed decisions. And right now, other legacy medias have been hit by the Chinese proxies, like the New York Times, for example, the USA News and Washington Post all have China inserts. Look like their paper, but they were articles. And it's like a paid advertisement, but in articles formats. And so for years and years, that have been fooled the readers. And we need to put a stop. And we need the real voice, the real news. And that's what Epoch Times is here to do.
Well, I mean, Janice, thank you for speaking out. I think many of our lawmakers would do well to get the courage that you have to speak out. We're going to have links up to the Epoch Times and NTD TV on the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Janice, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Professor Giordano. It's glad to be on your show.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.